Hello and welcome back to the Conflict Skills Podcast. I'm your host, professional mediator Simon Goode. I set up this podcast to provide free resources and tools for dealing with conflict, so if that sounds like the kind of thing that's useful for you, please consider pressing subscribe. In the episode today, I'm going to be looking at a conflict case study centering on a workplace. Here we've got a change that happens within a team, and 3 colleagues who previously were all at the same level are now experiencing some challenges because one of them has just got a promotion. They've become, in this case, the director, but I suppose in other situations it could be a team leader or a manager. And all of a sudden, whereas previously these people were friends and certainly in terms of work relationships, everything was very positive. Now all of a sudden they're dealing with the fallout maybe from some of the change and trying to figure out the options to get things back on track. So as always, when I talk about these workplace conflict case studies, I'm not necessarily saying that this is the single correct way to approach these kind of issues. Obviously, you're going to have a slightly different approach and a different style than what I would take. But hearing the way that I think about conflict, the frameworks that I apply and the different analytical tools that I tend to favor, that could then give you some different options that you can then translate into other situations of workplace conflict that you're dealing with. If you deal with a lot of conflict in your professional role, I'd strongly encourage you to consider subscribing. But I also have an online training course, The Essential Foundations for Managing Workplace Conflict. It's a self-paced course that I've just launched recently. So if you'd like to go that level deeper in terms of the research or the practical application from some of these aspects, that's an option that you could consider. It's on my website, simongoode.com. So as usual, I'm going to read the case study first, and then I'll talk about some of my initial responses, and then I'm going to explain some of the ways that we can think about changes within a team specifically. So here's the case study. The person writes, "I'm looking for conflict resolution frameworks or strategies to address growing tensions in a very small government office. The more systematic, the better. The players, the people involved, are 3 employees, A, B, and C, who used to all be in the same position and are very good friends both at and outside of work. When the long-term director retired, employee A was promoted to director with the full support of employees B and C. Now that employee A is in the director role, however, there have been growing tensions related to management style, communication, and slightly hostile behaviour. The employees all recognise that this is becoming an issue and hope to resolve it internally without escalating to HR." Well, I wonder, listening to me read through that, what aspects jump out at you? Have you been in a similar situation where you have been A and received the promotion and now all of a sudden things have shifted with the people that you work with? Or maybe you've been managing another group of people and you've seen a similar dynamic play out. It's very tricky, isn't it? When Tuckman talks about stages of team formation, he often talks about forming, storming, norming, and then performing. So forming is that initial stage where you're kind of getting to know each other. How are we going to be working together? Who's going to be doing what? What are our various responsibilities and what are our various duties and rights, etc., if that's something that comes along with it. Like we're starting from a blank page. So initially that's called forming because there's not a lot of defaults that we can go with. Now, when there's a change that happens within a team, like one person getting a promotion, I think it almost prompts us to revisit some of those earlier forming decisions. Like, how are we going to communicate with one another now that you're in a senior position? Whereas previously it was okay for me to show up 5 minutes late for a meeting. Is that something that continues to be acceptable, or is that now becoming an issue? When you've got an issue with my work performance, how will you go about communicating that to me? Where is the threshold where something becomes micromanagement and something is just an appropriate level of support that a director might be giving to the people within their teams? To a large extent, all of these aspects are actually subjective. They're in the eye of the perceiver. So as we go through this forming process, one of the mistakes I think that people make is that they assume that there should be a default starting point. As adults, this is the way that should be. We use common sense. This is the way that things should be. Well, good luck finding common sense amongst adults, and good luck finding reasonable adults that can all work together reasonably at all times. It often is very difficult. So you should probably expect that some of those previous expectations might need to be challenged. This might have been something that was acceptable previously, but now it might be something to revisit. And I think that can be a helpful discussion to have even informally, even if you are relatively sure that the person still wants things to remain on track. So I know that we would normally do just share the cleaning up after these kind of meetings. Is that still okay with you? Like, I'm just respectfully acknowledging the fact that there might be some point of difference here and just giving you the opportunity to raise it or talk about it if so. I think as well for the person who goes into that director's role, that often seems like a very supportive, deferential way of approaching it, of there might be things that need to change between us now. I think though for some of those issues that are raised, management style, communication, and hostile behaviour, these are all also subjective interpretations about how the person has been behaving. What are they doing? Like when we talk about tensions related to management style, very frequently it's things like feedback. How is feedback given? Is the staff member experiencing having someone look over their shoulder and it's almost like a micromanaging kind of dynamic that's playing out? Or maybe the staff member would describe the fact that they're not getting the support that they need, or there's new delays, or the director now has other priorities and they're not focused on how things are going within their local team in a day-to-day sense. All of these things might need to be adjusted, and what previously was how we would do it, well, now we might need to adapt, which is what Tuckman calls storming. So the forming is where we revisit or clarify some of those different norms and defaults that will go on between us. Storming is where, well, this is where we need to deal with these differences in expectation. I thought this was going to happen and you thought something else. I want this to happen and that's not something that you're prepared to agree to. So this storming Tuckman suggested was inherently normal, potentially unavoidable, and often quite important for setting the foundation for the team to perform well moving forward. So if there's a bit of tension that goes on around what's micromanagement or what's support, what's disrespectful communication and what's not, what is appropriate delegation of the director to assigning tasks to the team members, and what is completely overbearing and overwhelming and very likely to lead people to burnout. Like all of these different aspects are likely to have people presenting different perspectives. We've got different experiences. We've all got different backgrounds. So it makes sense that we would look at this same situation slightly differently. And given the fact that people are in different roles with different sets of priorities that they're focused on, it makes sense that there's a likelihood, it's likely that there might be some meeting of difference. I think something different to what you think. So it doesn't mean that things have to be really nasty or narky between us. I don't necessarily need to raise these issues in a hostile kind of way. At least I'm doing my best not to communicate in a way that's interpreted as being hostile, acknowledging the fact that I can't actually control how the other person interprets my behaviors. But I'll try to be pragmatic, matter of fact, composed and confident. It's okay, we can get through this. This is normal that we might need to talk through some of these different elements. I'm sure that we can come up with an option that's going to work for all of us. So it's normal that we might need to have some robust conversations, so to speak, and I'm optimistic about the fact that we can do that. And I'm approaching this in a collaborative kind of way, like let's work together to see if we can find something that's a good fit. Now that's very different to you need to learn how to talk to people on your team, or you need to learn that just because you're the director, you don't get to call the shots about everything, or you don't need to constantly have to look over my shoulders. Don't you trust us at all? As soon as we get to those somewhat ambiguous subjective terms like don't you trust us, or that's hostile behavior, or your management style is completely inappropriate, we've lost. It tends to be much more helpful to focus on the specific behaviors. When this issue comes up, could you communicate with me differently? Could you stop doing this? Could you change this? Could you start doing this? Could you give me more notice? Could you give me a little bit more context if you're looking for an input from me, rather than leaving me hanging and trying to scratch my head and puzzle things out behind the scenes? We have to ask for what we want. And that would also involve asking the other person, what do they want? What do you think would work? Given your perspective, what do you think would be the best way forward? And I think that often brings a very reciprocal type of behavior from the other party. Let's work together on this. Whereas if it's like your management style is a problem, well, we shouldn't be surprised if all we get in response then is a lot of defensiveness and resistance. So Tuckman suggested that storming can actually be helpful. We need to go through the forming, and then a lot of the time we need to go through the storming. What we need to do is to keep the conversation focused on the future and on the solutions as much as possible. So the third stage that Tuckman talked about was norming. We've got the forming, storming, norming. This is where we've kind of figured out how we're going to work together. We've kind of figured out the way that we'll communicate. When will we use emails? When will we use phone calls? What's an appropriate amount of time to be late for a meeting? If a client calls, should I pick up and answer it if my boss is talking to me? Like all of these different norms and sort of expectations gradually become clear. It's not at the beginning. We don't know how we're going to manage unforeseen circumstances. But as time goes on, a lot of the time we've got a bit of a track record that we can draw from. So there might be a bit of precedent that's created. It's not necessarily saying that that's the ideal way of doing things. And we can, of course, still tweak things, talk to other people about problems or issues that we're noticing, etc. But we're not starting from that blank page every time there's a decision that needs to be made. We've kind of got a little bit of momentum here in terms of shared expectations. So forming, storming, and norming, Tuckman then suggested that the fourth stage was performing. This is where we actually focus on doing the work rather than how we will actually do the work together. So if one person within a team has recently received a promotion, I would anticipate that probably that group of people are going to go through all four of those stages: forming, storming, norming, performing. And they might need different things from us as the manager or as us from a supportive colleague working alongside them, or whatever the context kinds of is, depending on which stage they're up to. At that forming stage, what tends to be quite helpful is asking questions that promote clarification. Where are these issues coming up? How often is it happening? What do you think is contributing to it? When that happens, what do you do? What does the other person do? What's the impact of that? What would you like them to do differently? How have you talked to them about that until now? How would they understand how you see this situation? What do they think you want? What do they think you're willing to offer them? These other-oriented questions, the very open-ended, curious kind of questions, they're very helpful. And inherently, I think we're almost anticipating that there's going to be some challenge in defining all of these different norms. There's going to be different things that we expect from one another until we've thought it through. And if there's a recent change, like someone's got a promotion, the previous norms don't apply anymore. We really do need to go back into that curious, open-ended, collaborative kind of way of thinking. So as a supportive person, you might need to ask coaching questions focused on the detail, the practical arrangements, the practical what happened next, how did you respond when that happened, etc. When people are stuck in the storming, what they often need is help with de-escalation. So a low tone of voice, slow speed, just offering a reassuring kind of presence to them, minimizing the frantic gestures that you would normally use, the worried look on your own face, and just letting them know, look, we can get through it, or I'm sure that you'll be able to get through it. There are some options that can help. Let's sit down and maybe we can put our heads together and do a bit of brainstorming. And it might not be perfect, but at least we could have the startings of a bit of a plan and a bit of a path forward, because right now it sounds like a lot of it feels quite overwhelming. So I'm saying to them, look, this isn't an easy process, but it's something that will need you to invest some energy and attention in. When that storming is occurring, de-escalation first. And then I think also those coaching questions around the goals. Well, I know that you were friends and you would hang out every weekend before you got this promotion. How do you realistically see things playing out moving forward? Like, do you think that's something that might need to change? And if so, in what way? And which of those elements are you particularly hoping to hold on to? The close relationships that you've got, it sounds like from your perspective, it would be a real shame if they were to drift and eventually fade out altogether. So I'm asking the coaching questions about their goal. What's the kind of minimum workable relationship that you're aiming for with these people that you're dealing with? and what other aspects are important to you as well. This might be a temporary thing, so you asking questions like what's going to be useful in the short term might be very useful for them, given the fact that it all feels quite catastrophic and overwhelming when we're in the heat of the moment. But you're reminding them that you're in an acting role. After 6 months, you're likely to go back to just being at the same level of these people. It might mean that they don't feel like the current problems are going to be affecting them forever. At least there's a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Or you might say to them, look, it's perfectly fine not to know all of the answers right now. You don't know fully what's going on for them, so it makes sense that you're not able to plan how you'll deal with every possibility that would come up. Let's do our best to think through what would a helpful conversation look like and what would be useful for you for preparing for that conversation. So I'm taking this is a big problem, this is a big drama, this isn't going to work, and saying to them, well, let's look at it step by step. Even if you don't know the answer right now, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing that you can do. There might be other people that you can engage, or looking at a planned approach over a period of time, even if it's not a quick fix. Things aren't necessarily going to be stuck the way that they are forever. So you asking these kind of questions, like what do you think might work? When you've dealt with these kind of situations in other roles that you've been in, what did you find useful back then? What ideas have you been considering? What suggestions or advice have you received from other people? Like, I'm really just open-ended facilitating brainstorming here, but that focus is always on the future and on the solutions. As the norms begin to develop and they move into that third stage, I would look more at clarifying, well, what's working, what's still holding you back, what issues still exist, what tweaks could be helpful, etc. I'm giving them the norm that this is something that you might need to pay attention to. You're in a leadership role now. So part of the influence that you have on your team is going to be in that internal culture, in that internal dynamic, the internal relationships that continue to play out. As a mediator, I think about them as reciprocal patterns that go on between us, but most people probably just say, how's the vibe within the team, or a much more simplistic way of describing it. But that's the norming process. It's that vibe becomes shared. We all have a sense that things are on the right track, or there's still tension that's sitting there. And as they move into the performing stage, it's very similar. It's saying to them, what's working, which meetings, which topics, which ways that you communicate with your team are working, and where could things be further tweaked? What could you experiment with? What options have you been considering? Even if it's just keeping things on track and doing a little bit of preemptive planning about potential problems that they might need to be dealing with in the future. Like when this person goes on leave in a couple of weeks, how are you planning to manage that within the team without all of you feeling like you're drowning and, trying to keep your head above water, or whatever the dynamic is that they're experiencing. So I suppose that's some of the thoughts that I would have when I look at that scenario of A, B, and C, dealing with the conflict that's going on within their team. But how would you approach it? Have you dealt with similar situations within teams that you've been a part of? Or as I said, have you been maybe the CEO or a business owner, and you've given one of your staff a promotion, and all of a sudden that's led to this dynamic where, well, it could be anything. People might feel like they're really walking on eggshells, and constantly people are being defensive, and sometimes it can lead people to really go into silos and just look after themselves. A real competitive kind of dynamic can develop where people aren't willing to chip in and aren't willing to help out, especially when someone else on the team might be needing some support. What have you experienced and what worked? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to shoot me an email, you can. It's podcast@simongoode.com. If you would like to consider my self-paced training or hiring me to come and run a workshop or speak to your team, please feel free to get in touch through my website as well. And otherwise, thank you very much for listening. If it's been helpful, I'd very much appreciate a positive review. And otherwise, I hopefully see you again in a future episode of the Conflict Skills Podcast. Bye for now.